Welcome to the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska Soybean farmers and their checkoff. I'm Susan Littlefield. We had a WASDE report this week, so we're going to dive into what those numbers had to say. Really, how the markets reacted on a Thursday. Some interesting things we saw happening at the close includes what's going on with these wheat prices. I think there's a few factors that are also happening from a global perspective and affecting the way we see our prices moving here in the States. Speaking of prices moving, we know the prices continue to jump not only at the grocery stores, but at your restaurants and different places you may be enjoying your meals. At what point is the consumer going to pull back on that pocketbook? We're going to take a look at that and a whole lot more on today's episode.
It may be small, but this little bean fuels a lot of power. It powers a food industry as a top source of protein. It's a fuel that powers diesel engines with fewer emissions. It powers a state economy and bottom lines, and it powers the rest of the world as a top Nebraska export. Yeah, it may be small, but we're finding more ways for this little bean to power Nebraska.
And welcome back. We'd like to welcome the guys from Tredas joining us today. You can see PJ and John both on the screen. And gentlemen, an interesting market happenings as we look over the WASDE report. That's kind of where I wanted to first start. And John, I think we're going to pull PJ up on the screen. We're going to switch here and talk with you a little bit, John, and give us your thoughts on what WASDE had to say.
Well, on the WASDE report, it appeared fairly neutral on the surface when you look at the numbers for the 21-22 ending stocks. They were right in line, if not slightly above the average estimate. 22-23 ending stocks, so the crop that we're actually planting now and then we'll be harvesting, they were right in line and slightly higher. So it was kind of interesting, and that's U.S. stocks, and then the world stocks were about the same boat, slightly higher ending stocks. So it's kind of interesting that, we had at one time, July corn was up double digits, about 10 or 12, I believe. And of course, new crop is up 18. And if we close there at 753 3/4, that will be a December contract high close. It's not the high water mark, which was 757. Soybeans are still kind of, they're not back up towards their highs, which is well over $15, but they are getting drug along for the ride of 8 at 14.81. And then the big one is wheat. I watch Chicago wheat being over here on the east side of the Mississippi. We're up 69 3/4, call it 70 cents at 11.82. That is the that is the high since the war started in the Russia-Ukrainian war, which was around 1260 or 1270 range. And now we're back up. This is the highest it's been since that time. I'm assuming that's some geopolitical issues. If the report was anything slightly bullish, it was wheat numbers. Those came in just slightly below the USDA, but nothing I would think that would drive wheat prices up, 70 cents. And again, maybe that's what's helping carry the corn higher today on what would appear to be somewhat, neutral to bearish.
Well, PJ, as you look at those numbers, did you see anything that kind of caught you by surprise or was some welcomed information for our row crop folks?
Surprise, like John said, the Chicago wheat, Kansas City forged a new contract high in the July board today, 1270. On quite the tear. You look at that report, and I think you look at the corn number. Was there something bullish in this and corn at 177 yield? I guess you could look at that and maybe say it's a bullish number.
Because the biggest trend line would have been 181. So
yeah, correct.
It was
correct.
a below trend.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole thing moving forward is everything's on a higher notice. I don't care what it is. we the next 45 to 60 days, we'll know a lot more about what this crop's going to be. But until then, we're going to be in this range and supportiveness of what if we have a drought? What if, demand gets stronger? What if Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. It's a never ending cycle. But at the end of the day, I think you can take this report over the last 20 years, we've been within 5 bushel of this yield. Well, that doesn't mean jack, I guess, to me. It's one of those things that the report's going to say what it's going to say, but you got to focus on what's happening in front of you. And when we're looking at 750 plus corn here on December, yeah, it could go to 9 and it could go back to 6. And historically speaking, unless we are the Kentucky Derby winner, we are going to trend back closer to 6 than we are to 9. And hopefully I'm wrong. We do go to 9 because that'd be good. But this thing's going to have a longer tail too. And I don't know if that's next year or 2024 or 2025. I don't have a crystal ball, but if you look back at history, the times we have broke out way above say trend line type prices, we end up following those up with years below the cost of production. So how much pain are you, as much good as it is now, what are you looking at out in the future? Because this is when you can lock in profit when maybe some of the people around you are not. And this is a chance to continually capitalize on profitable levels while they're out there, even with the unknowns in fertilizer.
Well, John, you were talking a little bit about these wheat prices, and obviously we saw the wheat prices take a big jump and had some influence as well on the other row crops.
Yeah, I would assume that again, because the other crops seemed fairly neutral, but the one that was a little bit bullish obviously has just taken off. That's wheat. It's up really strong, and I believe it's dragging them along for the other commodities for a ride. It's actually cooling off here right as we close. We're only up 60 right now. But again, here's what's also interesting. There really must be some concern over wheat. Typically when it's speculators and it's momentum trades, you see that happening in the front months. Whereas July 23, Chicago wheat is up 50 at 11.03. That one has been sneaking higher. And again, typically you just see a big inverse of when you have big bullish markets on the front end. Like for this year, the 22 crop, usually the 23 crop is well below it. But in this case of wheat, sure, there's a 65-cent inverse, but that's really not that big of an inverse in the wheat world, especially when you're talking about $11 and $12 wheat. So that's something that, the wheat seasonal also is typically when you're harvesting your crop, you should be looking at next year's crop and locking in some prices. Again, the big unknown is fertilizer, though. It is a nitrogen intensive crop like corn. So that's to be taken into account. But again, that's some pretty, that's $4 or $5 higher than normally when we get excited about wheat. Usually we're excited about wheat at 650, 7, at least, Chicago wheat on the east of the Mississippi. So that's some pretty stout numbers. So going back to the consumer price thing and inflation, I don't know if it stays like this, we're probably going to be paying more for a while to come.
Well, John, I think you had a point about funds and specs in there. And I was reading RJO Rich Feltus this morning, and he made the comment they're hearing that there are some specs and funds looking to jump into the commodity markets on breaks. And he said, if it was a bearish report, he thought it'd be pretty supportive just with the standpoint if they do want to maybe take some of the money out of the equities and, God forbid, I say cryptos and roll it back into commodities, which I hate talking about that because everyone says stock market goes down, we're going to pump this thing higher. It's not always the case, but at least one source has given us an indication that could be the case.
Now, John, I like it when we have you on because I like to find out how crops are looking in your neck of the woods because you're ahead of us when it comes to emergence and growing. So how are things looking? What are you hearing from folks in that area?
So we did get about a 2 to 3 week later start than we normally like to get. But once we did get it planted, there's been some good heat units. We've had good moisture. And, I actually just sent the guys a picture of some corn the other day that's already about 6 to 7 inches tall, and there's some that's a little further along and there's some that's still, spiking up and just coming on. But we're moved on to planting cotton, and actually a few of my clients are finishing up cotton. And then, most of our beans down here are after wheat. So the wheat will come off in it could be as early as 3 weeks, but somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks from today, we'll be in wide open wheat harvest, and then beans will go in right behind the combine. And there will be a few, they call them full season beans down here, but in the Midwest, we just call them beans because we plant them in the spring. And they'll be planted here shortly after cotton's done. But I haven't mentioned cotton price. That was up big earlier today. I actually don't have my cotton board up right now because I use a different one. But earlier today, it was up about 250 to 300 points, which is roughly 2.5 to 3 cents, and was back up to, I think, $1.27 on December cotton, which is extremely strong numbers for cotton. So things are, if you were able to lock in your inputs, there's a good margin to lock in right now. But obviously, the Mother Nature is the great equalizer.
Well, as we continue here at the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, want to switch gears and look at the livestock a little bit. And PJ, consumers are saying, okay, things are getting more pricey than we expected. I actually saw a joke on Twitter that said, I found a new diet. It's called not spending money to buy groceries. And I think when that is said, consumers are really starting to notice it in the pocketbook.
You're exactly right, Susan. And I'll just clip back short 7 days ago. I went to fill 2 5-gallon gas things up for my house for the mower, et cetera. and that was $40. And then I turned around and bought some bacon for BLT for Mother's Day, and that was $7.85, I want to say, and walked away with $47 in heartache. But is what it is. I mean, I do think it affects what the consumer buys. Do you start looking at more chicken? Do you start looking at the cheaper cuts of things and getting more resourceful in how you eat and what you consume? How much? I think that's the $1 million question. But I do, just well as I do, any of us, you all of a sudden look and say, do I need these ribeyes? Do I need 5 pounds of ground beef, or can I get by with chicken as a substitute, or whatever my next cheapest option is? Buy local and buy often is my suggestion to you. And if you can find a cattle guy near you or whatever, that's what I've been doing, is trying to stock up when I can and be happy with it. And as far as the nationwide consumer, it slows down. I think we got summer driving season ahead of us. Mm-hmm. I don't think that really stops demand. I mean, if you want to go on vacation, an extra $200, $300 in gas is a blow. Maybe you go somewhere closer, but you're still going to go somewhere. And at the end of the day, everything's going up too, though. I mean, wages by and large are going up. It's not a perfect one-for-one. It's not offsetting everything. But sadly to say, the American consumer also loves credit card debt. So you might see some of that too.
All right. We've been looking at a variety of different things today. And as we continue to take a look at what's going to happen in the weeks to come, I appreciate both of you joining us today.
Yes. Thank you very much, Susan.
Yeah,
all right. Well, PJ and John, they're both with Tredas. Of course, we encourage you, if you have any questions, reach out to them. They're on all the social media platforms. But we also want to remind folks that commodity futures and options involve a substantial risk of loss that might not be suitable for all investors. That's been this week's Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff.